Good afternoon and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. Before I introduce today's presenter, a few quick reminders as always. Everyone that is registered for today's program will receive a copy by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the lower right side of your interface under the Q&A bar. With us today is Cox Automotive Director of Mobility R&D, Stephanie Valdez-Streety. We were talking with Stephanie earlier, and she has a lot of great information to share. So I'm going to stop talking, and Stephanie, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's a pleasure. And I look forward to talking about EVs and how it impacts everything that in transportation. But before I get started, I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself. I've worked at Cox for almost 9 years. And I've worked in sustainability for a large part of that time and have a passion for energy, water, and waste reduction, but now excited to be part of the mobility team focused on electrification. And prior to Cox, I worked at Nissan North America in various roles, and I was there when the Nissan Leaf launched. So it's exciting to see how far EVs have come since then. So for the next few minutes, we'll talk about the EV, its role in the transportation future, and how it's impacting the consumer and ultimately your businesses as dealers. And then we'll dig into some adoption trends, consumer sentiments, and barriers to adoptions. Then talk a little bit about why EVs are different and their impact to dealer sales and fixed ops. So with that, let's get started. So by means of a setup, we all know that technology is a key enabler, changing how people and goods get around. So while Cox is investing across all these areas around autonomous, connected, shared, today we'll be focused solely on the EV and the way people and goods get around both passenger and fleets in the not so distant future will be dominated by the EV powertrain. And you've probably seen in the news every week there's information about commitments, investments, about battery production, recycling, and we'll talk a little bit about in the future of the presentation. So there's definitely a lot of momentum in this space. So with this slide, I want to point out just the strong wave of EVs that are coming now and in the future. So automakers are placing big bets on electric vehicles and investing unprecedented sums of money. Based on some just research on press releases on the internet, we've identified over 400 billion commitments in R&D and production. And partnerships are making this possible. From Ford's partnership with Rivian, and SK Innovation to GM, and Honda to Toyota, and Subaru to Volkswagen with Northvolt, the list goes on. These efforts will nearly triple the number of EV choices consumers have by 2023, led by introduction of over 100 new EV models available in the next few years. So what's ahead? 2022 highlights 23 new battery electric vehicle model introductions, as 2023 introduction plans are still being drawn by many OEMs. With more affordable, longer range options in sight across various models and makes, the top consumer barriers to adoption, cost and range, are being addressed real time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And it's also important to remember today that EVs are not evenly distributed. In 2020, EVs concentrated in a handful of states, including California, Florida, Texas, Washington, and New Jersey, where federal and often state incentives powerfully combine. So how many EVs are there really? On this slide, I want to set the stage of how many there are and the trends that we're seeing in the US car park. When I say EVs on this slide, I mean battery electric and full hybrids. So when you look at numbers, those are the combination. But the key trends to call out, on the left, we show the percentage of new car BEV and fuel hybrid car sales. We approach about 35% by 2030 versus 9% this year. On the right, we show projections from IHS data through 2030 on how the US car park electrifies. And by 2030, we forecast about 33 million BEVs and full hybrids will be on the road versus a car park today of close to 6 million. And 33 million equates to about 15% of the car park. And this number is almost evenly split between BEVs and full hybrids. So now we know the EV is different, and those differences are reverberating around the automotive ecosystem. So now I'll speak about those differences. First, let's talk about vehicle cost structure. Understanding the cost differential between an EV and ICE is key. An electric powertrain drives 37% of an EV cost and is coming down. In fact, back when the Nissan Leaf launched, an EV battery was about 1100 per kilowatt, and now it's about 127 per kilowatt. And hopefully, as we scale up production and with new technology innovation, that will continue to go down and make ICE and EVs more in parity cost wise. And then for the powertrain, it's about 13% of the vehicle cost. Next, vehicle value. Key drivers in the ICE world is miles. Further loads of diagnostic data is available to further inform value. Key driver in EV world is battery health as a predictor of value. And as you might imagine, limited data is available and known, and certainly less is shared today about battery degradation. Next, let's talk about salvage. The salvage and the end-of-life value chain is still developing for EVs, where recycling is both economically and environmentally required, but still there isn't a cohesive national policy and process around this. So there's a lot more that is needed to progress in this area. And that will be critical to ensure that we really benefit the carbon and environmental benefits of EVs, that we properly recycle the end-of-life batteries. Salvage for combustion is well known and defined. Let's move on to residual value. For ICE, as you can imagine, large depreciation data exists today, and there's a high level of confidence from banks and consumers. For EVs, residual valuation calculations are different, and today's limited EV data sets can limit the analysis, creating a chicken and egg situation. And finally, service and diagnostics. In the ICE world, service and preventative maintenance schedules are well known and capabilities are widespread. In EVs, predictive maintenance is evolving and capabilities are limited, especially in the aftermarket. Extended warranties are also changing the dynamics. So the impact of all this is that different approaches and capabilities are needed to be world-class caretakers of EVs. And despite all the upfront investments in production in the industry, I believe a lot less has been given thought of how to support and maintain and optimize EV batteries. And I'll talk a little bit at that at the end of the presentation. So now let's talk about the consumer and their changing sentiments. In some recent Kelley Blue Book research, we know that 19% of consumers are considering the purchase of electrified vehicles of any kind, and that includes EVs, hybrids, etc. Historically, EV buyers have been older, white, affluent men, and they're more likely to own luxury vehicles and have multiple vehicles for versatility. However, according to that research, EV considerers are almost half female, about 58% are millennial and Gen Z, and about 44% are non-white. In addition, the consumer is learning more about the EVs, about what the total cost of operation is, the eco-friendliness, and then what we're finding is once they get the experience of driving an EV, they figure out how much fun it is. It's a heck of a lot of fun to drive an EV. So those are some of the things that are becoming more aware in the consumer space. So we know about the consumer sentiments are changing. However, barriers to EV adoption still remain. We know from Cox Automotive studies of EV owners, EV considerers, and EV non-considerers that in 2020, common barriers to EV adoption remain, but their order has flipped since 2019. So number one concern today is about battery range or perception of not enough range. Concern number two is access to charging stations or perceptions about lack of infrastructure. On this same study, we found 68% of considerers believe insufficient infrastructure exists at home, and 63% of considerers believe insufficient infrastructure exists at work, where 80% of the charging gets done. And finally, 70% of consumers cite also initial costs from MSRP and understanding of cost savings and incentives as a barrier. Lastly, dealers' perceptions fairly closely match to consumers when it comes to EV concerns. So dealers are also skeptical about battery health, infrastructure, and additional cost. But some good news coming out of COVID. New and luxury shoppers who were previously interested in EVs prior to COVID-19 are showing even more interest now. So there's some good news coming out of this. And you probably hear a lot about, range anxiety, the infrastructure. So I wanted just to highlight what's changing in infrastructure, which is seen as a barrier. So fortunately, there is some charging infrastructure that's growing. And this slide shows that currently there's about 122,000 charging stations or charging ports and nearly 50,000 charging stations in use. And below is an example of this math with an electric vehicle charging station with 3 ports and 4 connects. And to highlight some of the players in this space, which we've also discovered in some research that the average consumer isn't aware of who these charging station companies are. But ChargePoint currently leads in the race with, they have over 13,000 charging stations, followed by Blink and Tesla with about 5,000 each. But be prepared, the charging infrastructure map is as complex as the business models, from hardware to network to service providers, and the space is starting to get crowded with new players. And I'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure bill in a few slides. Now, this slide speaks to consumers' desired battery range for EVs. The takeaway is that among EV considerers, the minimal acceptable range has increased nearly 20% over the last 3 years, from 184 miles to nearly 220. While during the same time, the estimated average range of an EV increased to 272 miles. Desired range also increased to nearly 350 miles, up 14% from 2019. The good news is that at the bottom, we show the average EV range has meaningfully increased over the last 3 years from 195 to 257, growth of about 32%. So the reality is that it's improving at a faster rate than considerers' desires. So definitely a good thing. Now let's go to expectations about charging time for EV considerers and owners. First, we look at average percent of time spent charging by location across these sets. We take actual numbers for EV owners and estimated number for EV considerers. We see that for owners, most actual charging takes place at home or at work. For EV considerers, the majority of estimated charging is expected to take place at home and work, just in smaller percents. Panning to the right, we start to talk about acceptable time to charge in minutes for owners and considerers, also known as dwell time. At home, where most actual and expected charging takes place, owners will accept charging time of over 2 hours, while considerers are less patient, accepting a little more than half the time of owners to charge, or just over an hour. In general, this theme continues for owners versus considerers, with considerers being less patient with the acceptable amount of charge time for location. The key takeaway here is that education is key around range and charging for consumers, and that once you become an owner, expectations about charging are often reset in a favorable manner, meaning acceptance for longer dwell times, if it means charging while you're doing other things like working or sleeping. Now I'll talk about EV incentives as a key measure to address the EV cost gap. According to Kelley Blue Book, sales of electric vehicles for Q2 climbed a staggering 201% year over year, reaching beyond 375,000 total combined EVs and hybrids. And sales of pure EVs surpassed 100,000 units. And in Q1, also started the year with a roar, with electrified vehicle sales growth of 81%, far outpacing industry growth. So what will drive EV adoption going forward? Definitely policy and incentives will surely play an important role. And there's a lot going on with bipartisan Build Back Better work and a new Democrat-driven reconciliation proposal to fill the gap. So there's still a lot of discussion, and this is being fine-tuned, but in general, it's creating a much-needed dialogue, putting focus on the electric powertrain. And key focus areas remain around discussions to remove the vehicle sales cap, also to introduce price caps for vehicle style from SUVs to trucks, as well as income caps. Incentives are also being considered for American-made EVs with union influence, and other funding is proposed to be directed towards fleet electrification, as well as grants to build up to 500,000 charging stations, which I showed earlier, which is about 122 right now throughout the US. Also, money to develop US supply chain for parts and minerals is being explored. And this is really going to be important if we want to have a robust supply chain in the US. So there's a lot of, the DOE has a lot of grant money to support this battery production and recycling. In addition, funds to retool automotive factories and train workers to make batteries and EVs. So there's a lot of money out there, and it'll be interesting to see how this progresses, and definitely think this will help with that EV cost gap. Okay, on this slide, it captures the residual value retention opportunity of used EVs and its impact on consumer perception. So what we're looking at is the average transaction price in the wholesale market of 2017 battery electric vehicles compared to 2017 internal combustion peers in 2018, 19, and 20. These are actual wholesale prices, so federal incentives are not involved and therefore not taken out. Model year 2017 vehicle comparisons specifically include the Bolt, Equinox, Fiat 500e, the Fiat 500, the Ioniq, Elantra, Kia Soul EV, Kia Soul, and the Nissan Leaf and Sentra. Throughout their first year, battery electric vehicles depreciated on average 16.5%, then 32% in the second, and then 25% in their third year. ICE vehicles depreciated 9.6%, 3.1%, and 0.3% in years 1, 2, and 3, respectively. So this drives a 28% variance in residual values across EVs when compared to pure ICE vehicles over a 3-year period. And this used EV discount is something we were working hard on at Cox to address for the industry and help drive both new sales and used sales. And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in this space at the end of the presentation. Now let's move on to the dealer. We know that 50% of EV considerers believe it is important for dealerships to be knowledgeable on electric vehicle performance and specifications, and for dealers to have electric vehicles ready for test driving that are fully charged, and also want sales team to be able to explain how to take care of an electric vehicle and know about charging infrastructure and how to talk about some of the incentives that are available. So dealers have adapted how they do business and embrace digital. So EVs usher in opportunities to showcase those leading dealer practices. During COVID, dealerships offered more digital retailing tools and more direct outreach to buyers. So the theme here is broader dealer sales processes are changing for all vehicles, but these digital sale changes benefit the EV sales process, especially when we think about the shifting demographics of the EV buyer. EV owners are trending younger, more diverse, and almost half are women. As part of our COVID-19 impact study, we know that 64% of shoppers want to do more of the purchase online, and 84% dealers agree customers want to purchase online. And these changing preferences are driving change at the dealership, with 69% of franchise dealers adding at least one digital retailing step due to COVID. And specific EV-related steps that ranked high for consumers to complete online include finding incentives, and with EVs, there's a big education opportunity. Also, applying and qualifying for financing, calculating monthly payments, selecting add-ons like extended warranties, and given the concern about batteries, that is a great opportunity. And we also know from that research that more than half, 52%, bought extended warranty for their EV battery, driven by the concern about battery health and life. So in general, the industry is evolving to support a more digital sales process, which is an opportunity to meet the consumer, and especially the EV consumer where they are online. So another theme I want to highlight that's associated with the dealer experience is that dealers have more influence than they think with the EV purchase decision as they participate more in the digital retailing process. And dealers can play an even bigger role in driving EV adoption. Consumers want to be educated and have their assumptions confirmed. They expect dealers to show how to operate EVs, how to take care of them, how to arrange for a charging station at home, or how to navigate charging networks outside of their home. As consumer satisfaction with new car dealerships reached an all-time high at 72%, now is a great time to solidify a leadership position by investing in knowledge that supports consumer expectations. Okay, now let's talk about what are the EV implications for investment in training and equipment. So we know that EVs are different. And a few slides back, we talked about 5 key differences from vehicle value all the way to salvage. But we also know that EVs are impacting the dealer in new ways, and many of these new ways require investment. First set of investment opportunities related to training for both sales and fixed ops. So targeted messaging on the EV value proposition, so lower total cost of operation for fleet and passengers, EV care and giving information on how and when the vehicle should be charged, how to coordinate a test drive, these are all relevant for your sales teams to know. And then there's all the work to educate the consumers on state and federal incentives and all things charging. Where to find out, how does it work, how do I install? These are questions that will arise. And then with fixed ops training and high voltage and charging will be necessary, like certifications from OEM and other industry accreditations like SAE L3 are needed. Additionally, safety on new equipment like lifts, battery pack diagnostics, battery storage and shipments, installs, and the ability to charge and discharge. Then there's the purchase of new equipment. Again, safety is a theme with PPE investments in the basics like gloves, proper fire extinguishers, rescue hooks, equipment like forklifts to move batteries, and of course the chargers and other specific tools and fasteners. So these are examples of some of the investments in training and equipment that be needed. And I also think with opportunities on the website. So we talk about the education, you have the website, and with the digital retailing, there's an opportunity to drive consumers to an easy place on the website about education, charging infrastructure, and I think that will help to create more awareness and mitigate some of the barriers around adoption. So now let's talk about what the implication of EVs are to fixed ops. For starters, the majority of the top 15 opportunities remain for EVs. When we did our path to EV adoption study, we found that 54% of dealers anticipated a lower ROI from EV sales. But there's more to the story based on what we're seeing play out in the fixed ops today. Leveraging service records from our X-Time fixed ops tool, we know that the majority, or 80% of the top 15 service opportunities remain for EVs. And approximately 90% of the revenue associated with these services is also retained. So to the left side of this Venn diagram, the 3 out of the top 15 services that are outplaced with EVs. So only 3: oil change, the transmission fluid, and engine air filter changes. In the center, it's highlighted the remaining 12 of the top 15 today that are relevant for ICE and EVs. So services such as tire replacement, rotation, mounting and balancing, and tires are big for EVs given weight and torque. Diagnostics, small parts replacements like wiper and cabin filter also remain. Although brake work may be less frequent, pad and rotor as well as brake flushes are still required. However, the real message on this slide is to highlight the opportunity on the right. So while the majority of the top service orders remain in the EV world, there's a host of new high voltage battery services unlocked for EVs. Everything from battery diagnostics, repair, remanufacture, end-of-life services, and sales of chargers. It's also important to remember that the electrified components are self-regulating heaters, transmission control, and inverters can bring a higher repair cost as well. And we haven't even touched over-the-air updates. While not unique to EVs, over-the-air updates can create more customer interaction and often service-based visits to demo and confirm understanding of new functionality. So the theme is that EV batteries bring new service opportunities, and while their service and repair rates are being established, when things go wrong, work is often expensive, and for the near term, also warranty work will be limiting competition from third-party players. In fact, we have some stats to prove it from our 2020-2021 service industry study. We found that EV owners are getting more services done per visit than EVs. It was 4.0 versus 2.8. So that's some really good news to come out of that survey. So now on the heels of the discussion we had on fixed ops impacts, I want to take a minute to highlight the evolving warranty and repair space for EVs. We know the EV powertrain warranties are longer, with many exceeding 8 years, 100,000 miles, and many also cover pack degradation. This sees as a bit of a captive market for service work at dealers through the life of the warranty. We talked in the previous slide about how 80% of the top 15 service events remain for EVs. And on the right side of the slide, it's sort of reinforcing that with many of the Gen V1s hitting the market, the service support profile is still being figured out. An article from Ward's Auto raises questions about the lower assumed EV service profile. And Stout's recall data started to baseline EV battery recall campaigns in 2019, signaling an upward trend, and we're all aware of the recent battery recall news. Bottom line that I'll take from Stout's 2020 automotive defect and recall report is that electric and other vehicle propulsion systems represent another field of rapid innovation and fundamental change to motor vehicle technology. And in the Ward's article, NHTSA's Stephen Rodello was quoted saying, "New technologies lead to new challenges" during an SAE analyst conference, as attention turns to the care and feeding of integrated electrical components that impact service and support. Now let's talk a little bit about battery health, as we've seen throughout this presentation that's one of the skepticisms about EVs, because we know three things. They transact at a discount, often 10% lower than their ICE peers. The battery pack makes up about 40% of the cost of an EV, and 83% of consumers are skeptical about battery health. In response to that, we've introduced a battery health certificate called Battery Vitals at our Mannheim auctions to drive buyer confidence, support residual values, and provide OEMs with more data and more control of battery flow in the aftermarket. So how are we bringing this battery health to life? We have a patented, novel, and multifaceted approach to battery health testing. We've built a diagnostic tool along with Spears New Technology, and they're the newest member of our Cox Automotive Mobility family. And this tool collects battery management system data from the vehicle that are known to leave an imprint on battery health. Things that have to do with speed, temperature, and amount of energy put through a battery experiences. And then a battery health score appears as part of our condition report, much like we are presenting other diagnostic information about the vehicle in the condition report. So think about this work as Mannheim bringing the battery lab to the vehicle and issuing a real-time report to represent battery health. And this real-time report serves to support buying decisions on an asset whose condition can't be fully assessed by visual inspection and it's working. So year to date, it's in this pilot, we've had close to 1,000 vehicles tested across 5 OEMs, and the batteries are performing well. Less than 4% of vehicles receive scores lower than a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5. And the higher trims average higher battery health scores. And with the current data sample, we are seeing 1 to 4% increase in sales price over the average sale price. So that's kind of exciting news for us on the results of that. So what else is Cox doing? We just talked about investment Cox is making to help our clients better inspect, value, and represent electric vehicles and their high voltage batteries in the marketplace. In addition, we are setting up to help our clients optimize first life of the battery pack and by offering end of life services. So this is being done through the build out of a battery service center network, starting in Oklahoma and Holland and rapidly expanding across the US and Europe. And hopefully we'll have some service centers in Detroit and Las Vegas in the near term. And our key beliefs are that we see the EV battery life cycle as a closed loop system fueled by things like regulation as well as OEM commitments. And we see battery health as a key enabler to this closed loop system. In other words, battery health enables decision making. And we also believe optimizing the first life of the vehicle battery pack is essential for good economics and also preserving the environment. And the pre-treatment recycling plays an important role in the ecosystem, and we're getting up to speed there as well. Lastly, a digital record and certificate of the EV battery, which includes key data such as battery chemistry, birth date, service dates, health and evaluation, is needed to support the closed loop ecosystem. And I believe we have a great head start with bin to bin data in our system called Alfred, which is part of our software system. Further, regional battery service centers consolidate key activities in a one-stop shop for logistics management, storage, remanufacturing, and pre-treatment recycling. So the benefits of the co-location are many, but include reduced logistics, cost, and waste time. So in closing, with nearly 6 million battery electric and full hybrids on the road today, and another 675,000 added in the first half of this year alone, bottom line, the EV has arrived, and the time to invest is now while profits are at record highs. Digitization of dealer sales for EVs is a no-brainer and fits well with the changing demographic. There's real opportunity in fixed ops to retain the vast majority of service today and capture incremental diagnostics and repair work for powertrain, which drives the most of the cost of the overall EV. And long warranties will enable you to retain customers, as well new technologies like over the air, which deepens your interactions and still often requires physical service support. So there's still time to prepare, and we urge you to take early action to educate sales and fix ops to drive experience. And the EV is a different paradigm from cost structure to valuation, diagnostics, to mileage, to battery health, to residual value, and servicing to salvage. And along with these changes comes a sea of opportunity. So at Cox, we're here to help enable this market and prepare our clients and industry for the EV future. So with that, I'll take questions and answer any additional thoughts you might have.
Stephanie, thanks so much for coming and talking with us today. If anyone has any questions, you can pass them along to me and I will get them to Stephanie, or you can email them directly to her. There's so much important information within this presentation. So again, you will all be receiving a copy of this webinar by the end of this week.
Oh, Rachel, I was also going to say we have an EV study that's coming out. I think it's going to be mid-November, but I will send that to you and Dan that you can share with everyone as well. So that'll have a lot of good information in it. And I also, I released an EV white paper. It's more about the environmental and health benefits, but I will also share that with you.
Perfect. And we'll be sure to get that to our members. To those on the line, join us back here next Tuesday, October 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern as Google discusses the future of auto retail. For more information about AIADA, visit aiada.org. Thanks for joining us and have a great day, everyone.